today we are also here as South Africans to lay claim to Reverend Jesse Jackson as one of our own, and to say he does not belong to you only, he also belongs to us.
A few weeks ago, South Africa lost a man who was never born here, never lived here permanently, and yet somehow became part of its story. Civil rights. Reverend Jesse Jackson was not South African, but when he died on February 17, 2026, tributes poured in across the country as if one of our own had fallen. Streets in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban fell silent in reflection. News outlets replayed his speeches, activists shared stories of his visits decades ago, and even young South Africans, who had never seen him in person, took to social media to express gratitude for his solidarity. That alone should make you pause. How does someone from thousands of kilometers away become so deeply tied to a nation's struggle? And more importantly, what does that say about us today? Jesse Louis Jackson was born on October 8, 1941, in Greenville, South Carolina, at a time when segregation was not just a system, but a way of life. Born into hardship, he was never adopted formally, but he was deeply influenced by his family and mentors, who instilled in him a sense of responsibility, resilience, and justice. From the very beginning, inequality was not something he read about, it was something he lived. Separate schools, separate opportunities, separate futures. But what separated Jackson from many others was not just that he saw injustice, it was that he refused to accept it. That refusal would become the defining force of his life.
Your 3 E's.
Well, my point is that we must be ethnic, which is our blackness, accept our African roots, our African heritage, get all of the psychological self-esteem that we need out of being black. Have our natural hairdos and our symbols of blackness, but you got to go beyond being ethnic. You must also be ethical. Cain and Abel were ethnic. They were 2 brothers, came out the same mother's womb, but they were not ethical, and so they killed each other. So in addition to being ethnic, you must be ethical, but beyond that you must be excellent. Because in the last analysis, the only thing that will protect you from genocide is to be necessary. I mean, whether you're in America or in Africa and wherever, your life chances are increased by being excellent. Now, you may not survive even if you're not excellent, but you're almost guaranteed to get wiped out if you're not excellent. I mean, that which has protected a Hank Aaron, that which protected a Willie Mays, that which has sustained a Muhammad Ali, that which has made a Ralph Bunche go down into the annals of science, or George Washington Carver, is in spite of a racist society not liking their ethnicity, their excellence was of such until even their enemies had to respect where they were coming from.
By the 1960s, he found himself walking alongside Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most powerful voices of the civil rights movement. Together, they marched, protested, and demanded change in a system that had long ignored the cries of Black Americans. Jackson was there during some of the most pivotal moments in American history, including the push for voting rights that led to the Selma marches of 1965. These were not easy times. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and silenced. But Jackson kept showing up. He understood something profound. Courage was contagious, and leadership was about presence, about showing up when others turned away. In 1971, he founded the Rainbow Push Coalition, an organization focused on economic empowerment, education, and social justice. It wasn't just about protest anymore. It was about building systems that could sustain equality. But even then, something bigger was forming in his mind. Because while he was fighting injustice in America, he began to see a mirror of that same injustice thousands of miles away. That mirror was South Africa. Before we continue, like this video up and subscribe if you are yet to. Thank you. In 1979, Jackson made his first visit to Soweto. What he saw there would change him, and in some ways change history. Children marched to schools under armed supervision, communities were policed with impunity, and any voice of dissent was crushed. Jackson met with local leaders, underground organizers, and ordinary citizens listening, learning, and documenting. He saw that apartheid was more than political. It was psychological, economic, and relentless. And he understood something crucial. The struggle in South Africa mirrored the fight he had lived through in America. He returned to the United States and began amplifying South Africa's plight on global platforms. He called for sanctions, challenged multinational corporations, and pressed governments to reconsider complicity in apartheid. At a time when many world leaders turned a blind eye, Jackson's voice rang loud. By the early 1980s, he had become one of the loudest voices calling for Nelson Mandela's release.
Nelson Mandela, when his body was released, it took us to unbelievable heights. His spirit leaving takes us to unbelievable depths. He was a global impact force for good. And though having suffered his way into prominence with his suffering and his vision, he chose at a critical moment reconciliation over retribution. If he had chosen retribution for the years of suffering, it would have been a bloody, divided South Africa even today. By choosing reconciliation over retribution, it's the largest economy in South Africa and sets an example for the world. When there are a crisis, use a political process for resolution, not a violent one. But he was talented and of course, a very bright lawyer. He, along with Oliver Tambo, helped to form the South African Youth Congress in 1945. So all of his life was caught up in this ambition to free his country. He came up through the ranks. He tried nonviolence for a while, and the government was so rigid, killing people with massacres in Soweto and various places. He finally became the military general of the military arm of Free South Africa. And I remember him saying to me, maybe in the last conversation a couple of years ago, that when they found them on the farm in Littleville, that they had been bombing installations, railroads and the like. They were about to escalate and begin to attack some people, maybe a hospital, maybe a school. He's glad that he was caught. He would rather have suffered in jail than have killed innocent people. He did not want the blood on his hands. And that sense of principle, tough mind, tender heart was Nelson Mandela.
Mandela, imprisoned for decades on Robben Island, was largely unknown to much of the global population. Jackson changed that. He framed Mandela not as a criminal, as some governments claimed, but as a symbol of dignity, resistance, and hope. Then came 1985, a pivotal year. Over 150,000 people gathered in London to protest apartheid. Jackson was there, linking struggles, connecting movements, and sending a clear message. Injustice anywhere is a threat everywhere. His advocacy contributed directly to international awareness and economic pressure on the apartheid regime, shaking the foundations of a system that had long seemed untouchable. By 1990, Nelson Mandela walked free. Jackson's voice had been part of that chorus demanding justice. Mandela acknowledged international allies, Jackson included, for their role in global solidarity. South Africa transitioned to democracy in 1994, officially ending apartheid. The world celebrated. Yet Jackson returned to South Africa multiple times in the years that followed. He emphasized reconciliation, unity, and economic empowerment, reminding the new generation that freedom was not the finish line. It was the beginning. And then came the funeral, 6 weeks ago, a moment that reflected the global impact of his life. Chicago hosted the main memorial, but tributes poured in from around the world. South African leaders, both current and former, spoke about Jackson's unwavering commitment to their struggle. His influence spanned continents. Ambassadors, civil rights activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens paid their respects. Flowers, letters from school children, and banners honoring his legacy lined the streets. African leaders virtually attended, sharing their gratitude and recounting moments from Jackson's visits that had left a lasting imprint. It wasn't only South Africans who mourned him. American political figures, civil rights icons, and leaders from Europe and Asia publicly reflected on his life, highlighting how his advocacy for global justice connected struggles everywhere. Even younger generations, who had never known the face of apartheid, learned about its realities through the lens of his work. But let's step back for a moment. What made Jackson's impact so unusual? He was never a South African citizen. He never lived there permanently. Yet he understood something most did not. Injustice is universal. He recognized that silence in the face of oppression, whether in South Carolina or Soweto, was complicity. In the months following the funeral, South Africans shared stories of his visits. Teachers recounted how he had spoken to students about unity and economic empowerment. Community leaders remembered long conversations about local development. Politicians, remembering his strategic advice, admitted how much his global voice had helped push reform faster. And here lies the uncomfortable reflection. Today, decades after apartheid, South Africa is free, but freedom alone did not erase inequality. Corruption, unemployment, and systemic challenges persist. Jackson's life forces a critical question. If an outsider could care that deeply, what does that say about those who live the consequences daily? Jesse Jackson believed in action over words. He was arrested multiple times for protesting, ran for president in 1984 and 1988, and constantly challenged systems that perpetuated injustice. His legacy is not passive, it demands engagement. It demands reflection and responsibility. And yet, the story doesn't end with his funeral. Across South Africa, communities now hold discussions inspired by his advocacy. Youth groups, schools, and civil organizations use his speeches to teach accountability, empathy, and the importance of civic engagement. His visitations decades ago are now lessons in history, leadership, and global solidarity. He connected continents, fought against borders, and made silence impossible. And in doing so, he asked a simple but profound question of us all. What will we do with the freedom we have? Weeks after his passing, the world continues to reflect. Memorials in Chicago, virtual tributes from Africa, and local commemorations in South African cities remind us that a life of conviction resonates far beyond borders. Letters from students, community gatherings, and even protests inspired by his legacy continue, proving that influence is measured not only by action, but by the ripple effect left behind. The funeral itself reflected a global gathering of hearts and minds. From dignitaries to ordinary citizens, each paid tribute in unique ways. Speeches recounted his first visits to Soweto. Songs he admired were performed by local choirs. International journalists highlighted his campaigns against apartheid, and messages of solidarity streamed in from countries around the world. South Africans laid flowers at memorials in every major city, each petal symbolizing gratitude for a man who never claimed the land as his own, but loved its people as if it were. And now, the critical reflection. Jackson's story forces us to ask, what happens after the battle is won? What happens when freedom is no longer external, but internal? What happens when the responsibility lies not with allies abroad, but with citizens inside the nation? This is not about blame. It's about awareness. It's about understanding that freedom requires vigilance, care, and engagement. Jackson's life was a living lesson in solidarity, courage, and persistence. His visits, speeches, and advocacy form a roadmap, a challenge to today's leaders, youth, and ordinary citizens alike. Rise to the moment, protect what was fought for, and act with conscience. And if you've listened this far, the question is yours to answer. Will we honor his legacy by remembering, or by acting? Will we allow silence, neglect, or self-interest to undo the freedoms so hard-won? Because the story didn't end with him. It continues with us. And if you haven't yet, subscribe now, join the conversation. Reflect, engage, and tell us in the comments. How should South Africa honor Reverend Jesse Jackson's legacy in tangible ways today?